talking about one of my favorite passages from a book I don't think we've used yet in Coffee. I know we've used this book, the Book of First Kings. We've used Second Kings in Coffee, and we've used First Kings in other series, but I don't think we've used it yet in Coffee. So another one down. My goal is to use all of them. Some of them were a little tricky. Third John, I don't know how we're going to use that, but we'll figure it out. Anyway, so we'll have a week of obscure books. Here we are, First Kings, chapter 19. Coffee needs to kick him. First Kings, chapter 19. We have the prophet Elijah fleeing from, it says Jezebel, but it's the whole kingdom. It's not just Jezebel. Come on, don't throw it all on Jezebel. But anyway, the whole kingdom that's been corrupted. He's fleeing into the wilderness, goes to Horeb, Mount Horeb, and I love this. He had the showdown. He's running for his life. Here, I'll just go ahead and read this. This is really good. Well, we have this splitting mountains and wind and earthquake and fire, where the Lord is in any of those places, and then finally, in the silence, that's where God is, right? And so it's funny. The voice of God says to Elijah in verse 13, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Can you imagine? You just witnessed earthquake, mountain splitting, fire, great winds, probably like a tornado typhoon kind of thing going on, and then utter silence. And from that, the voice of God asking, "What are you doing here?" And Elijah's response is pretty good. "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." It's funny. This is a passage that Elijah, he's had it rough because he's on the run. But right before this conversation could even happen, God's very smart. You probably guessed it. God feeds Elijah. In fact, God feeds Elijah cake, right? Where'd it go? Verse 4 begins the narrative. But yes, verse 6, that at his head there was a cake baked on hot stones. Right? He gets to eat divine cake, and then they're allowed to have this conversation. See, I think it's funny. God, when I read this story, just like yesterday eating a Snickers, right? Cake. God approves of eating cake. This is a great theological point to remember, especially on birthdays. 2, God's a good baker. No. Okay. Another interesting part of this is that God, knows where Elijah's coming from, knows where Elijah's going to go, gives him this cake, feeds him, and then we have the conversation, right? Feed someone before you have the conversation. This is it's funny. This is how God works with us. We get communion, and then we're sent out into the world. We are given grace and forgiveness, and then we are told to share. Right? God always provides for us first, and then sends us out. And so it's funny. Life, there's lots of earthquakes. There's lots of mountain splitting, winds, all these different distractions and eruptions and things happening in our life. I'm running, where is God? God's in the silence, according to this story. God's in the cake you just ate. God's in what's being provided, not the things that are destroying. God's in the voice asking, "What are you doing?" See, I think sometimes in a year like this where it's so chaotic, no one knows what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I would love cake too. This is one of those years. But what if we looked for God in the silence? What if we dared to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we doing here? Just because this time is different or not what we want it to be doesn't mean it's lost. Because God has already provided. Maybe we're not seeing it. Elijah kind of just eats the cakes and just kind of disregards it. He's so focused. God, this is terrible. I'm running for my life. And Elijah, have another piece of cake. Why are you here? It's okay. It's going to work out. And actually, the story is followed by Elijah finding Elisha, his right hand man, and helps out a lot. So, like I said, what we learned from the story: eat cake, and God likes cake. God feeds us, provides for us. God's in the silence. God asks us, what are you doing? Seriously, today, what are you doing? How's it enriching your life for those around you? Let them eat cake, says the Lord. I'll see you tomorrow.